BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
I'm Davie Scott. This is Classic Scottish Albums. Episode 43, Strawberry Switchblade by Strawberry Switchblade.
It was the strawberry and the switchblade. It just made sense to me. It looked good written down, just so it sounded amazing.
They really were so aptly named, weren't they? This kind of juxtaposition of those words. The sweet and the killer, strawberry and switchblade.
Just close your eyes and then remember the thoughts you've locked away.
When I first found myself in the cold embrace of the London music industry in late 1984, I kept hearing a record on the radio, and every time I heard it, I thought, that is what I want to do. It was recognisably 80s in its gloss and mechanised groove, but rooted strongly in classic 1960s pop music. Sonic style, multicoloured melody and harmony, and a shiver of darkness running right up its spine. And of course, that record was Since Yesterday by Strawberry Switchblade, a perfect forerunner to their first and final album. The origins of the music and the special visual aesthetic that anchored it are rooted just off Sauchiehall Street in the mixed media department of the Glasgow School of Art, the first meeting place of lead singer Rose McDowall and artist Jill Bryson.
It just felt like it was the right place to be for me, because I'd missed some school. I'd been agoraphobic. I'd basically stayed in for a year, didn't go to school. And what do you do? Pre-internet, pre any kind of decent TV. What do you do? I just spent the year drawing and listening to music, you know. Mm-hmm. My dad took me to one of the degree shows when I was 11 or something, or 10 or 11. I thought, this is a good place to be. Having been part of the sort of punk scene in Glasgow and actually experiencing young Glasgow bands, you know. Of course there were musicians and there were bands who were from Scotland and from Glasgow, but you never saw them. To see a band arise, you know, kind of from ordinary folk and start playing, and that's kind of what punk did, started. So then we actually started going to see bands who we knew and people we knew and saw around, and it was great. It made me feel like it was a possibility to make music.
I think when punk happened, that actually, honestly, it was like the gates of freedom opening and anything was possible. I never was going to be what everybody expected anyway. I was always the odd one out. And when punk happened, it seriously was like the gates of hell opening and just letting you out.
There exists a series of extraordinary photographs from Jill Bryson's time at the Glasgow School of Art in the early 80s. Her exhibitions of polka-dotted striped textiles photographed against similarly textured backgrounds and often modelled by Rose McDowall set out the famous Strawberry Switchblade look almost verbatim, years before Top of the Pops and years before smash hits. And of course it was more than a look, it was an idea based in punk, in DIY, in pop art, and in a lot of deep thinking and process.
As soon as I saw them, I fell in love with them.
Music journalist and broadcaster Nicola Meehan.
They were like nothing else, weren't they? Or certainly nothing I'd ever seen. They looked like they came from some kind of polka-dotted steampunk future or some day-glow past. And of course they had this, my goodness, this kind of ribbon-clad Technicolor hair that reminded me a bit of Boy George. It reminded me a bit of Lena Lovitch, who terrified me. But somehow, all of those aspects, the colour, the ribbons, the polka dots, the makeup, this kind of gothic, romantic girl group look, this kind of jumble sale style was amazing. And somehow, they sounded like they looked.
Visually, they were absolutely amazing. It was like looking at two kind of actresses almost their outfits, the sheer volume of accessories within their hair. They were like a pair of beautiful twins. It was almost a trickery that was created there, because I think sometimes when you look at people visually, you make your own assumptions and you stereotype. And I think there was far more depth to them as a band, as opposed to what people might see just from the outside.
That's music journalist and podcast host Halina Rifai. And Halina's absolutely right. There's a depth to Strawberry Switchblade, both aesthetically and musically. I think part of it might be down to the differences between the two and how that dynamic pushed them both into new creative areas.
I always was quite a strong individual, as in I want something, I go for that sort of thing. I wouldn't say I was ambitious, but I knew what I liked and I wanted to be me.
She was really different from me. She was like a real outgoing person. I'm not outgoing. I'm really shy. I was agoraphobic. I don't, so I didn't socialise much. And she was incredibly confident. She was just like, everybody knew her. People really liked her.
Well, I'm a total empath, and like when we got together, I knew that Jill had agoraphobia, but I wasn't thinking music business-wise. I was thinking I'm doing something I love, and if other people like it, that's a bonus. I think like when we got together, we just had such a good laugh together.
So their paths have crossed, and one fateful day they're hanging out with another iconic name on the Glasgow music scene.
James Kirk from Orange Juice gave me the name Strawberry Switchblade because he was doing a fanzine and he said, I'm not going to do it anymore. He was getting fed up with it. It was called Strawberry Switchblade. I went, you cannot, you have to do it. That name is so amazing. And he said, and eventually through the conversation, he said, have it. I went, have the name. So basically, the name came before the band, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I had the name. I decided I was going to use this for a band. And Jill and Peter were around our house and she was just saying, who's in the band? And I went, well, I don't know yet. And she said, can I? And I went, yeah, what do you want to play? It was really that was our really raw beginnings. And we did egg each other on. There's nothing better than two people working together and just building that enthusiasm, bouncing off each other and just, driving each other. We were brilliant at that and we had the greatest fun.
If you really want to know how I feel, you'll have to turn away.
The two of us got together and we thought we need to have a band. So we got another couple of girls, Carol McGowan and Janice Goodlett, bass player and drummer, and we decided that we'd book a gig. So we booked a gig and then we thought we'd better write some songs. So that was that really stupid thing. So we wrote 6 songs. I think the first one I wrote was Trees and Flowers.
I'm going to break a wee classic Scottish albums rule here, and I know you'll forgive me because the song Trees and Flowers, which didn't originally appear on this album, although it did grace a subsequent reissue, is such a very special and beautiful thing, both in its early demo version and in the ornate arrangement later released. Written by Jill Bryson, the song offers a deep glimpse into her own lived experience, and does so through the lens of a diaristic lyric, gorgeous major 7th harmony, and that unique Strawberry Switchblade vocal blend.
I started off with the chords, and funnily enough, I think I bought a songbook of old 60s songs, loving, but some of them, when you buy a book to play, on guitar, and it had guitar tabs on it, so that I used to get chords from that and little chord progressions, and I would look at them and go, that's quite nice. And so I would find a couple of chords that I liked, or that I liked together, and I would play them, and then I'd start to sing along, to get a melody, just kind of bye-byeing or talk just gibberish. And then I had to the lyrics I just found very, very difficult.
Don't close the door, and it
I love that title, or rather, maybe what I particularly love is the fact that the lyrics completely upend your expectations. I would imagine that if you were in a shop, probably be Woolworths back in the day, wouldn't it? Or your local record shop, of course, and you picked up a 7-inch by Strawberry Switchblade and it was called Trees and Flowers. I don't know, you might be expecting some kind of rainbows and unicorns tribute to nature, something happy and and celebratory. But of course what this is a kind of a real sort of a reflection, an exploration of the fact that Jill suffers from agoraphobia. She is horrified by the thought of leaving the house and of going outside, and is actually terrified of those very things, the buildings and the trees and the flowers. And I think that kind of underscores what I think both Jill and Rose have said in the past about their songs being inspired by trauma in all sorts of guises.
I don't know why I thought about trees and flowers. I just thought it's like a kind of poetic way of saying that you hate going out. And I know, well, that's something I know about, and I have panic attacks. I can't go out, and so I was just trying to get that across.
So you hate the trees and you hate the
I
flowers.
don't hate trees and flowers.
No. I know you don't, but
But
it's
it's
such
that
a great
kind of.
it's a
I
great
hate
moment.
the buildings. It's like I don't want to be. When you're out and everything's awful, you don't want to be there. So there's nothing that you're going to get from that except fear.
Can't you see? I get so frightened. No one else needs frightened. Only me. Only me.
I wrote Trees and Flowers, and then we wrote another few songs. Rose wrote the lyrics. That's so I kind of strummed it. We got the melody. She did the lyrics. But so I, apart from Trees and Flowers, and there's a couple of tracks on the album that I wrote the lyrics for, she generally did the lyrics.
As Jill said, Rose wrote most of the lyrics in the album, but I'm always keen to know how the collaborative process works in a band. The earlier 4-piece lineup, including Carl McGowan and Janice Goodlett, didn't pan out for a number of reasons, so Rose and Jill refocused their efforts as a duo.
In my house in Darnley, of all places, Jill would come out there and I had the reel-to-reel, and so we did some demos on that and we wrote there. In the beginning, very much both of us writing most of the stuff together. I really like it when you can bounce off each other with ideas and stuff, because you grow more musically. I mean, we were basically writing on the go. So when we came to do the album, it was like we did one Peel session and Kid Jensen session, and seriously, we had 8 songs. So we decided the 4 that were good for Peel and the 4 that were good for Jensen.
One of the songs that was good for early radio sessions was what has become their iconic moment, Since Yesterday. But what you're about to hear is quite different from the single they released a short time after.
Since Yesterday was originally called Dance, and it had different lyrics. We worked on that a bit before we released it on the album.
The song itself kind of changed dramatically, lyrically totally different, musically, melodically slightly different. Rose rewrote the verse melodically and really, I think, made it way better. It just came together. It was kind of a little bit rinky-dink before that, and when she kind of came up with this, and it was like, well, that's great, and the lyrics, great. It always had sort of potential to be good, but then when that happened, I just thought, it just all came together.
It really captures the spirit of the 80s and the yesteryear. It's brazen, but you've got your nostalgic horns, and there's these staccato synths, which are a notable sound for the band. The song kind of ambles along, but it's got this colourful backdrop of shuffle beats and also thoughtful lyrics. And you've got these harmonised la-la-las that feel almost otherworldly, as if you're looking down at Earth from space, or indeed you're sat amongst the stars. But you then find out that McDowall supposedly later claimed was about nuclear war, which was mind-blowing.
I never told anybody this because it was very common for bands to be very political in the 80s, and I really didn't want to go down that road. It was basically about nuclear holocaust, because we were living through the sort of Cold War era, and I had a baby at the time, a small child, and to be in fear of a nuclear war when you have a baby is, God, it's gut-wrenching. So since yesterday, it was really about that, about what you would have left, Everything's gone now since yesterday because, it would have been. And so it was quite a dark song, and quite a lot of the lyrics are quite sad, but I quite like to make lyrics a bit ominous, so it's not obvious what they're about. I like that kind of thing. I like to create images in people's heads when they're listening to the music.
Well, maybe this could be the ending, with nothing left of you. 100 wishes couldn't say, I don't want to.
The transformation of the song wasn't down to Rose and Jill alone. Once they were within the clutches of a major record label, they started casting around for the right producer. And in this case, they struck lucky in the then youthful hands and ears of David Motion.
Since Yesterday had always been earmarked as the single, or the first single, and we kept coming back to Since Yesterday. We knew it was the important track, but it's like it needed some kind of key elements. And then for some reason, I'd always been a bit of a fan of Sibelius anyway, and I just thought, let's try this. Got in the French horn player and basically borrowed it. This is pre-sampling. I didn't tell anybody, for which I'm slightly embarrassed. So sorry about that for Sibelius's heirs, but it just sort of worked.
I didn't have any idea when I was a kid that this kind of opening horns were pinched from Sibelius, were a homage to Sibelius. But I think now that's really interesting as well, because obviously that in itself is a fanfare to the past. It's kind of signposting where it's looking from the very beginning of the song.
The other big thing about that record was also the mix. Because we kept trying. That's one we tried several times. I was getting quite frustrated. I was working with my very close friend Trig, so we were working away, and it was just like it was not quite happening. It was all right, but not quite happening. And like really late at night, pretty much on with 8 hours left on the clock, if you like, I said, let's just take all the faders down and start again. It's not quite happening. And then I said to Trig, we need to just try something a bit crazy on this, something different. And then he just started with the EQ on the snare drum. He said, well, what about this? And he just went really extreme, like particular frequencies up to the top. And I said, that's it. And then we built the track around that, and then everything just sort of slotted into place. So it was literally like a late night thing. And then the middle eight, that had always just sort of kind of ambled along without really doing anything. And then that was also a moment where we thought this just needs also to be kind of edgy. Then we got that kind of metronomic kind of feel. We're triggering something off the hi-hat sound. And so there was a kind of a chick, 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 chick thing going on. Everything else was sounding, really kind of bright and fresh and how we wanted. And then we thought, why don't we just put the whole track through the gate and trigger it off the hi-hat? That's what we've ended up with. So the whole track, the whole backing track, was just going chick, 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 chick. And then we had it.
It's so clear that all we have now are our thoughts from yesterday.
It's funny, sometimes if I'm listening to the radio when I'm working, I listen to the radio, and Since Yesterday will come on, and it's just like, oh, let's just crank it up and go, that's all right,
Davie Scott here with classic Scottish albums from BBC Radio Scotland. And in this episode, we're up close and personal with Strawberry Switchblade. David Motion clearly put a big stamp on the finished album, and there is quite a unique blend of contemporary production techniques with classically grounded music ideas and arrangements. And on top of all of that, you have these two relative rookies turning in marvellously accomplished studio vocals. So for Rose and Jill, how did it feel to have gone from their Scottish bedrooms to a corporate, expensive London studio?
The making of the album was great fun. I really enjoyed doing it because he was just kind of coming up with all this stuff and kind of atmospheric, obviously very electronic.
That was the 80s, and I was very much aspiring to be the next Trevor Horn or somebody like that. So it was, to me, it was a fantastic opportunity. It was the sort of a moment where a producer could have a massive effect, and I was given a ton of freedom around it.
It was very electronic, and we had real reservations about that in the beginning because we were a guitar band basically. But once we'd finished the album, I actually think those songs were taken to another step, another place with David Motion's sort of contribution to it. It's kind of good seeing the really naive, primitive form of writing sort of growing. And it doesn't really, it doesn't change the songs, it changes the sound of the songs, but it doesn't change them.
Maybe in a way, Rose, again, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't mean to, maybe he and people like Andrew Poppy and David Bedford who contribute the arrangements and all that, actually just identified the ambition in the writing. Because if something like James Orstreet, I mean, that beautiful kind of big outro brass arrangement that you hear, it kind of just does the song service, and it's
great. I love what happened to it, and the harmonies. Like when we were with David Bedford, we recorded that song with him, and doing all that build, crescendoing harmonies and stuff. It was exactly what I wanted to do. That one still touches me really deeply because it was a real place that I lived, just up the hill from the necropolis, where they kind of knocked it down to extend the Royal Infirmary. And I was at my happiest when I lived there.
When I prepped the track, I was using some tuned white noise, so there's that kind of almost like a submarine-y sound going on, kind of that kind of thing, and that kind of helped the track to begin with. And then there seemed to be, it needed like this second section, the kind of end section, and Andrew Poppy, who I knew, he then did the arrangement for the brass, and I think that works beautifully. This kind of the sort of dissonance just sort of gave it another kind of dimension, really.
It's a heartbeat that's slowed right down to a faint tick with this song, and there's these spectral synths and a dream pop ambience which is set at a very different tone to the rest of the album. And it provides a beautiful pause midway through the album dynamically. And it's a diminuendo. And I think it's really cleverly placed within that album as well.
If I could point you to just one thing to think about this album, besides the incredible vocal performances, besides the unique musical and visual aesthetic of it, I would just say listen to the core songwriting, the fantastic tunes. The song Being Cold describes a journey back and forth across the border with a beautifully simple and mournful melody.
Well, that was another sort of agoraphobic song, because that was about travelling from Glasgow to London constantly. Oh my God. And I hated travelling, and every time I travelled it would be, will I get on the train, will I not? Because there were times when I didn't get on. In fact, I think we were going down to meet, when we signed a publishing deal, I couldn't get on the train to go and meet the publisher, so I just couldn't do it. So my boyfriend at the time went with Rose and her husband. The three of them went. I stayed at home, and I was like, you know, that is, oh God. Anyway, so it was just that constant. I really found it so difficult, you know. It's boring as well, but it's difficult, and that was trying to get across that kind of feeling. And it's the reason we moved to London in the end, just because I thought it's going to be better to be there than to be constantly coming back and having to leave again, you know. Because I found that just awful, you know, and I didn't want to leave. I never wanted to live in London, and I ended up staying there for 30 odd years.
And there's a funny line in there as well where you talk about while we were laughing, we passed from one land to the next. Which is a lovely line, which also seems to sum up that kind of transience.
Yeah, because you're just like, you're going from we're not in Scotland anymore. We're just the whole thing about backwards and forwards and being displaced. Being displaced is a big thing for me. You know, I like being at home. I like to have, you know, everything around me, and I'm not a traveller. I'm not an adventurer, and you know, so I forced myself to do it, but it was really challenging. So I guess that was a way of kind of exercising it.
It's a beautiful song, and I wrote some of the lyrics and I wrote some of the melodica bits, but it was predominantly Jill that wrote that. It kind of was quite tragic when, you know, I'd have to go down to London to talk to the record companies on my own, because Jill couldn't, because she'd had an agoraphobic attack and she just could not get on the train.
You know, for all of the sound of young Scotland confidence and independence of spirit that existed north of the border in the early 80s, if you wanted to push your music to anything like a sustainable audience, you still had to head south. Thankfully, Jill did make it on the train for an appointment at the BBC's Elstree studios.
Some good tunes to cuddle up to tonight, some good stuff. Great to see the highest new entry in the chart this week. Two ladies from Scotland. This is Rose and Jill, Strawberry Switchblade, Since Yesterday. Leave that alone.
I was terrified at Top of the Pops, just like, it's hard to know now, isn't it? It's hard for people to understand. That was the only thing that you could see where you might see your favourite band. You know, it was like the practically the only thing on TV. So being part of it was kind of, just mind-boggling.
You had today.
And I remember at school, the careers officer came round and asked everybody in the class what they wanted to do. And they all said, see, he's working the shipyards, they were still around then, things like that. And I just said, I want to be a brain surgeon or a pop star. And the whole class, they just totally hysterical laughter in the classroom. But when I was on Top of the Pops, a flashing thought went through my head when I was standing there, when we were performing on Top of the Pops. I wonder if they're laughing now.
Looking for a reason to go on. It's so clear that all we have now are our thoughts of yesterday.
The evergreen Since Yesterday, in its utter perfection, casts such a long shadow that it's easy to forget the music we have that came before it and after it in the shape of this album. And what we have is a collection of utterly perfect moments, and underneath the 1980s clatter of its production, a collection of deeply personal songs delivered with authenticity and style, with two Scottish artists at the heart of it, at once perfectly aligned and at the same time uniquely different in approach. From Jill's teenage bedroom to the Glasgow School of Art, Rose's 10 James Orr Street to Top of the Pops, their combined experiences make Strawberry Switchblade by Strawberry Switchblade a classic Scottish album.
It is a very Scottish album because the experiences and the songs are quite a lot of them are very unique to having grown up in Scotland. The whole essence came from two Scottish people, so it's got to be Scottish.
It's not an indie album, is it? It's a pop record made by indie girls.
Maybe all that yearning for the past on it, maybe it was always meant to be looked back upon fondly, certainly as by me. I wish they'd made more records, but I'm awful glad they made that one.
My thanks to Rose McDowall and Jill Bryson, to producer David Motion, and to music journalist Nicola Meehan and Halina Rifai. And thanks to you for listening to Classic Scottish Albums. The podcast is available on BBC Sounds or wherever you find yours. And in case you didn't know, we follow every show with a podcast of our key interviews. So if you subscribe to the feed, you'll get to hear my in-depth chats with both Rose and Jill too. Classic Scottish Albums is produced by Elizabeth Clark.
Subscribe to this show on BBC Sounds and don't miss the next episode.